2021 was an extraordinary season, wasn't it? And 2022 seemed a little bit underwhelming. You know, I'm not a diehard Formula One fan. I know you are, but from my perspective, it just seemed a little bit underwhelming. Do you think between 2023, considering Red Bull, obviously you mentioned the 10% penalty in the wind tunnel, considering, you know, that you mentioned the likes of Fernando Alonso's and Lewis Hamilton's, do you think 2023 could be a lot more interesting, especially for people who are perhaps not as into the sport as others?
I think it needs to be, is the answer for Formula One, because of course for 2022 they introduced completely new technical regulations, totally new look cars, and the whole point of that was to work alongside the budget cap and the wind tunnel allocations to try and close the grid up, because obviously that was a problem that had occurred in Formula One. Over time it had grown, where you had the top three of Ferrari, Mercedes and Red Bull traditionally, who were just completely in the distance from the midfield. You know, there was no stopping them. So the new regulations were obviously designed to try and stop that happening in future, to make it more competitive. But the problem for Formula One is in 2021, even before these regulations came in, there were signs that the grid was actually converging. Like in that season, like you had Alpine winning the Hungarian Grand Prix through Esteban Ocon. You know, you had Ferrari on the podium, you had McLaren getting in on the podium action as well. So 2022, then it was a bit of a double whammy almost for Formula One, because it was naturally a bit of a step back, because you only had Lando Norris on the podium at Imola in 2022. That was the only non-Ferrari, Red Bull or Mercedes podium. So already that was disappointing. But then you also have to consider these new cars had come in with a big song and dance about how they were going to make the grid closer, following easier, and therefore overtaking. So it's always the way of new regulations, really. They tend to spread the grid out again, because obviously somebody gets it right, somebody gets it very wrong, and somebody gets it in the middle. So what they need now from this season is to see signs of the grid starting to close back up. And I think there is a good chance that we're starting to see that. I mean, I say if Mercedes have sorted their problems out with the W14, then you can expect them and Ferrari to take the fight to Red Bull across the season. And then, of course, like I say, we have Aston Martin and Alpine, who look like they have got themselves firmly to the front of the midfield, and hopefully are now starting to narrow that gap to those top three, because it was a huge gap in 2022. So we would be in very lucky times, I think, if they eliminated that gap just at once. But if they can take a big chunk out of it, say narrow it to half a second rather than a second per lap, then that's already going to be huge progress. So I think you could confidently predict that the grid is going to be more competitive in 2023. I know especially the teams think the midfield at least is going to be just one big block. It seems very hard to pick from the midfield a team, maybe other than Aston Martin, who are just absolutely at the front. It seems like it could be anybody's game. So hopefully they start carrying each other towards that top three.